At this time, we would have the Torah reading and the Haftorah, which we will have next week. We have a bat mitzvah next week who has learned a lot of Torah reading and the Haftorah. I did a rehearsal this week with Esther Sabah, and she is wonderful. So next week we will, with the physical distancing just of that immediate family, have a Torah reading. But today, as on most Shabbatot where we're not reading Torah formally, it's my opportunity to do a little bit of a teaching on the parashah. This morning, our Torah reading, the reading for Jews around the world, is Parsha Shalach Lecha, which begins with a word that we know in English and which will also conclude our Torah reading today, namely the word Tetur. V'daber Adonai el Moshe lemor, and the ever-present one spoke to Moses, saying, Shalach lecha anashim, send for yourself, if you should so choose. At least that's how the word is understood of for you. Anashim, people, v'yaturu et eretz Canaan, and let them tour the land of Canaan. Did you know that the word in English to tour comes from this Hebrew expression? Asher ani noten lifnei Yisrael, which I give to the children of Israel, a representative of each of the tribes. And then their names are listed, and again in verse 17, Vayishlach otam Moshe, and Moses sent them, Latur et Eretz Canaan, to tour the land of Canaan. And he said to them, Alu Zeba Negev, go up beginning from the south, from the Negev, Va'alitem, and go all the way up to the mountains in the north. Or item et Aretz, and look at the land. Mahu, what is it? What is it? Veta'am hayoshev aleha, and the people that dwell upon her. Hechazakhu harafeh, are they strong or weak? Hama'at hu imrav, are they many or are they a few or many? Umaha aretz, and what is this land? Asher hu yoshev ba, in which they dwell upon it. Hatovahi imra'ah, is it good or a bad land? And what are the nature of the cities? Yoshev behena mechanayim ubemivtsarim. Are they fortified or not? And is that land a land that is fat or thin? Are there trees or is there fruit on that land? And it so happened that this was the time of the harvest of the ripe grapes. Well, this touring does not go the way that Moses and God would have wanted it to, or for that matter, the way that Joshua or Caleb, 2 of the 12 representatives, interpreted what they saw. The 12 tribes, the 12 spies, the 12 scouts return. And that symbol till this day of tourism in Israel, of a large cluster of grapes between 2 men carrying it on their shoulders, is the way it's described. This land, this harvest of grapes, was extraordinary. And so they begin and they say, all 12 of them, this indeed is a land, Zavad Chalav Udvash, flowing with milk and honey. But they say, 10 of those 12 say, but the people who dwell in that land, they're huge. Nephilim, they're giants. Anak, there are these huge people in huge fortified walls. Hayoshev ochelet haaretz yoshev et ochaleha. It is a land that consumes those who dwell in it. And then they say, V'sham ra'inu et nephilim, and there we saw those giants, b'nei anak, the children of awesome size, mina nephilim, from the giants, v'nehi ve'einenu b'chagavim, and we look like grasshoppers to ourselves. V'chein hayinu be'einehem, and so we looked in their eyes, like grasshoppers. And the whole community, as the next chapter begins, broke into loud cries, and the people wept that night. All the Israelites railed against Moses and Aaron. If only we had died in the land of Egypt, the whole community shouted at them. Or if only we might die in this wilderness. Why is the Lord taking us to that land to fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be carried off. It would be better for us to go back to Egypt. And they said to one another, let us head back. V'nashuvu Mitzrayma. We will return to Egypt. Not unlike last week. Remember last week in Parsha Bahalotcha, the people were saying, let's go back to Egypt, where we had fish and cucumbers, garlic. We had so much abundance to eat. And in that case, Moses reaches his low point. Now, it is God who reaches a low point. And God will say to Moses, enough. I've had enough of this people. Let me wipe them out. How much longer, quote, shall the wicked community keep muttering against me? Very well, if I have heeded the incessant muttering of the Israelites against me. And so, in this case, Moses represents the people, and it seems as if they can continue to move forward. But God says, you will only move forward, and you will do so culminating in 40 years, but it's only your children who will be those who enter the land. As if you, who are the adults in the community who have cried and despaired, looking to go back, you won't have the wherewithal in order to go forward. And here's one more additional piece that's often ignored. Verse 44, yet defiantly after now they've been condemned, they march toward the crest of the hill country, though neither the Lord's ark of the covenant nor Moses stirred from the camp. And the Amalekites and the Canaanites who dwelt in the hill country came down and dealt them a shattering blow at Hormah. Those two verses are quite remarkable in themselves, as if now the people say, okay, God, we'll do what you wanted us to do before. But this time they were asked not to do so, and so they erred again. Well, all of this Torah reading ends with a paragraph which will be my teaching. And that's the paragraph that we recite traditionally twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. We read it today in English, and it is chapter 15, verses 37 to 41. And I read it with the intent of hopefully commenting on these 4 verses so that when we chant them, we will have the context of this Torah reading and a greater understanding. V'yomer Adonai al Moshe lemor, and God said to Moses, speaking, Daber el bnei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel, v'amarta lehem, and say to them, v'asu lahem tzitzit, you shall put fringes al kanfei vigdehem, on the corners of your garments, lidorotam, for each generation, v'nanu kol hakanaf betil techelet, and there shall be a deep blue thread techelet among those fringes. V'haya lechem letzitzit, and these fringes will be for you. Uritem oto, when you look upon it. Uschartem et kol mitzvot Adonai, you shall remember all the commandments of Adonai. va'asitem otam, and you shall do them. Velo taturu, and don't go touring. Acharei levavchem, after your hearts. V'acharei einechem, and after your eyes. Asher atem zonim achareihem, which you may be lusting to go after them. I'll stop there, which is halfway. The fringes are to be on the four corners of the garment. In antiquity, people wore, if you will, ponchos. They didn't have buttons. They didn't have zippers. What they did is they had a long garment, and they would put a hole in the middle for the head, or they would wrap it around them, toga style, with a tie, with a belt. And because it was this long garment, on each corner there was to be a fringe. Rashi, the great biblical commentator, will say that the word for fringe, tzitzit, equals 600. There are to be 8 fringes and 5 knots, at least as it developed in the oral tradition. And he would say tzitzit 600 plus 8 plus 5 is 613. When you look upon a fringe, you are to remember that you have responsibilities in this world. Symbols. We are commanded to wear a symbol to remind us of our responsibilities. A talit is not a sacred garment. Interestingly, when a person dies, they're often buried in a talit. That's a custom. But one of the fringes is cut off for purposes of burial to say they're no longer using this garment to pray with. But the garment itself is just a garment in our tradition. In fact, when it should develop a hole or be worn out, it's not to necessarily be treated other than another kind of garment. Because again, this was all the garments that the people wore. All of their garments had 4 fringes, which is to pause to talk for a moment about symbols. Symbols point beyond themselves. That's true for the American flag. It's true for tzitzit. For the tzitzit, it points to responsibilities. It points toward God. But even the word God is a symbol. It's a word we use to describe something greater than words can express. And so one thing to know in terms of idolatry, and that is symbols should not be worshipped. They are not the end. They are only reminders. They are a means. The word "tatur" here is a word that's identified with our Torah reading of touring, gone astray. So we are to use these tzitzit to remind us not to go after our hearts. And now I pause with the word after our hearts. In this case, as in many in the Bible, it's written livavchem with 2 bets. And that second bet seems to be superfluous. The Talmud in Brachot 54a will comment on this verse and say, why is this word, your hearts, written with 2 bets? Because our hearts can be divided. Our hearts can be divided, the Talmud says, to inclinations for good or inclinations for bad. We are given notice that when we go touring, we can go astray. Our spies, how did they go astray? They went astray by imagining how their enemies saw them. The rabbis say, how do the spies know that the people who dwelt in the land didn't see them as angels, rather than as they described their Canaanites, Amalekites, Anakites, seeing them as grasshoppers? Livavchem, do not go astray over that quality of a divided heart. V'acharei einechem, after your eyes. Asher atem zonim achereihem, for what is lusted for. Be on notice and use tzitzit to stabilize yourself. My teacher, Rabbi Abraham Twersky, says, in reading this phrase, that to have lust is only human. That's an emotion. To have fear, to see yourself as only a grasshopper, that's only an emotion. But we do have control over how we act. We do have control on how we choose to respond to emotions. But he will emphasize that our ability to choose is an act of intellect and will. Fear is not feeling afraid. Fear is acting for a higher goal despite being afraid. And that ultimately, all of us have reasons at times to be afraid. All of us have reason at times to long for a past that perhaps never existed, as described in the Bible for those who longed for the flesh pots of Egypt. But we are cautioned in this prayer, in this paragraph of Torah that comes after the debacle of the spies, not to follow again after our lusts, after our weaknesses, after our yetzer hara, our inclination for expediency. And then it continues, Leman tiskaru, so that you will remember, v'asitem et kol mitzvotai, and do. That's the word that gets circled. It is what we do that defines us. Et kol mitzvotai, all of my expectations, and then V'heyitem kiroshim le'Elohechem, and then you shall be holy to me. Yehoshua Leibovitz, one of the great teachers of Hebrew University, who was the chair of the Department of the History of Science and a great scholar of Jewish learning, he emphasizes in this phrase that it doesn't say you are holy. It's in the future tense. If you do my mitzvot, then you will be toward holiness. It's in the future tense. V'hiyitem karoshim. We are never holy. He would emphasize. And in the immediate next paragraph, which we'll read next week, Korach challenges Moses, and he says to his cousin, he says, Moses, who are you to put yourself above us? We are all a holy people. And Professor Leibovitz would say, that is a mistake. You are never holy as a status when you are human. Only God is holy. We are seeking, pursuing, seeing the world through God's eyes and acting as if we are acting in the image of God. That's the aspiration. That is the direction. That is our capacity to be more than just human. But don't be fooled to think that you are already great. Do not be fooled to think that greatness, let alone holiness, is something you own or possess. You only become better by having high aspirations. Ani Adonai Elohechem, I, God, am the ever-present one, your God. Asher hodseiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. Liyot lachem le'Elohim, to be for you divine. Ani, I, Adonai Elohechem, am the ever-present one, your God. This final verse of what is only 4 verses emphasizes, you are not God. That is the first commandment of the 10 commandments. I am God, you are not. And to pull this together, we who are human are fallible. We naturally have urges, lusts, longings for what could have been, longings for, and nostalgia that never was. In the case of our Torah reading, the people unravel. They hear the report of the spies that's mixed with truth and a commentary of fear. Yes, it's a land flowing with milk and honey, but we are incapable of ever conquering it because we were like grasshoppers in our eyes, and so we were in their eyes. And so the people cry and say, "Let us go back. Let us return to Egypt." And the response on a religious dimension is look forward. It won't be you who have demonstrated a lack of capacity to assume responsibility to overcome your fears. But we're fringes, symbols, for a religious life is a life of the imagination, a life in which symbols remind us of responsibilities and possibilities. Look at the blue fringe, which will remind you of the sky, of the miracle of creation, and of the ocean and its vastness, of a creator who created you, of your creatureliness and your possibilities, you who are created in the image of God. But with levavchem, with a heart that's naturally pulled in opposite directions, it is not your emotions that will define you, it is your actions. It's your ability to be self-constrained, to be restrained in doing what is right. Mitzvot, God's commandments. Look at the tzitzit and remember that forward direction comes with responsibility. And remember that it is I who brought you out of the land of Egypt, which means there are yet great possibilities of where we can yet go together. Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, let us look forward with hope. It is natural that as we look around us, we see brokenness. But let us not panic. Let us not be nihilistic, seeing the world as pointless. Rather, let us know that we have indeed experienced greatness in the past, but we are not defined by moments of the past. The miracles of the past did not create faith for those in the desert that we read of today. Rather, it's an act of discipline, of harnessing will to overcome yearnings that are often lustful, depraved, low. Let us rise high. Let us use tzitzit to remind us of responsibilities. And may we use those symbols to see ourselves in partnership with the ever-present one, leading us to lives of wholeness, lives of goodness, lives of shalom. And together we say, Amen.